Michelle, this is the last official week of no college football playoff rankings heading into the next week of play. So before the rankings come out, we're going to kind of look at some games that's going to have an impact this week, but also talk about 4 questions we have before the rankings come out. What is your first question?
I want to know from the committee if the Big Ten has done enough, including after Week 9 games, to have 2 teams in the top 4 when the initial rankings come out. Ohio State and Michigan are obviously the 2 best teams in the Big Ten, and I think even though they haven't played each other yet, you could make an argument for both of which one is better than the other. The only thing we really have to compare for these 2 teams that haven't really played too many challenging games so far this season is looking at Penn State. Ohio State's going to go on the road this weekend and play Penn State in Happy Valley, which is a notoriously difficult place to play. Now, if the Buckeyes can beat Penn State in a similar dominating fashion to the way Michigan beat Penn State, then I think it's possible that the Big Ten has made a strong argument that it should have 2 teams, at least in the initial rankings in the top 4. I don't think Michigan is going to have too much of a problem this weekend with Michigan State, but that might not be enough for the Big Ten to have 2 teams in the top 4. But if both teams win convincing games this week, and maybe there's some other slip-ups around the country, I think it's possible that at least in the initial rankings, after which we know plenty can change, the Big Ten could have 2 teams among the top 4.
Yeah, I can definitely see that happen. And my first question, honestly, kind of goes off of this. Where does the committee put Ohio State and Michigan? If you were to ask me, unbiasedly, I think Michigan should be ahead of Ohio State. If you look at the head-to-head after this week, they only have one true test, and that'll be Penn State. We've seen Michigan take care of them. If Ohio State struggles, mind you, it's on the road, unlike Michigan, I can see the committee saying, all right, we're going to have one Big Ten team in, and it's going to be Michigan. And you kind of have to go back to the last time we saw these 2 teams play. Michigan looked like the better squad, and both teams have gotten better. But if you just go off of what you saw last year, Michigan should be considered the favorite. Now, Ohio State can change that by having a dominant performance against Penn State. Come out early and attack, and don't even make it a close competition. If you do that, you might get in over Michigan and be that one Big Ten team in, or they might say, you know what, these are 2 powerhouses. Let's get them both in. So where they rank these 2 would kind of tell you how they feel about them until they play at the last game of the year. And my second question, where's Alabama? We know the committee loves Alabama. They've been in as a 1-loss team, and they have 1 loss right now. Now, that loss came with a big asterisk as their Heisman winning quarterback was not at 100%. Bryce Young versus Tennessee, we could see that there was still some ligaments right there in that shoulder that didn't have him as the Heisman candidate that we saw early in the season. Now, if it comes to Tennessee has 1 loss, Alabama has 1 loss, you'll easily say give it to Tennessee. They beat the better team. But the committee might say Alabama lost on the road to a lucky field goal with their quarterback, Heisman winning quarterback, not at 100%. And guess what? I think college football fans might be irritated, but they would like to see Alabama at 100% over a Tennessee team that barely beat them at home. I know it might sound crazy, but Alabama still has a shot to get in, even with the 1 loss to Tennessee.
I completely agree about your point on Alabama, and what's interesting is then my last question kind of wraps this all up together. If the Big Ten doesn't have 2 teams in the top 4 in the initial college football playoff rankings, I think it's very possible that we have 3 SEC teams up at the top. Like you said, Alabama gets a little bit of a boost. There is, over the years, we've seen some bias in favor of Alabama from the playoff committee. And I think that could carry over, assuming that Tennessee beats a good ranked Kentucky team this weekend. Georgia is obviously a given. That team continues to roll despite some struggles a couple weeks ago against Missouri. Georgia by far looks like the best team in the country. But I think if maybe, Ohio State doesn't have too many convincing wins, and Clemson definitely doesn't have too many convincing wins, and maybe it doesn't matter what Michigan does this weekend, I think you could come out of Week 9 if all these SEC teams win. Alabama's on a bye. I think we could, in the first initial rankings, have 3 SEC teams among the top 4. Not necessarily in this order, but you could go Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, and Ohio State. I think that's really reasonable for these initial rankings. There's obviously plenty of football left to be played. Got to see how the rest of the SEC schedule and the SEC championship game ultimately shake out before, any of this is finalized. But I think it's really possible that you have, which fans will hate, but you could have 3 SEC teams in the top 4 in these first rankings, depending on how Week 9 games shake out.
This is no knock to the ACC, Pac-12, Big 12. We know that there is an SEC bias in the College Football Playoff Committee, so don't be surprised if they have 2 or 3 teams in the first top 4 rankings that come out next Tuesday.